Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's webinar. My name is Siddharth, or just Sid, if that's easier to pronounce, and I'll be your host and presenter for this session. Before we get started, I just want to make sure everything is okay with the Zoom setup. Do take a moment to let me know on the chat if you can hear me loud and clear. I hope you can also see my chat screen. Let me just quickly confirm that. Awesome. Thank you so much for confirming. So this webinar is on security analytics, and we're going to be looking at 5 different anomalies that you need to focus on. But I'm not just going to focus on just what are these 5 anomalies, but I'm also going to talk about how we can track such things using what we call a UEBA or a UEBA solution. Right, so this is what we have in store for this webinar. It is going to be maybe a 30 to 40 minute presentation, and we do have some time set aside for Q&A. So you might be able to see, if for those of you who are new to using Zoom, you'll be able to see a Q&A section, so you can use that to ask your questions, and we will answer them at the end of the session. So I'll try to do a live Q&A at the end, where I can answer the questions for the benefit of everyone. So keep your questions coming on the Q&A, right? So that is one thing. The other is that we are recording this session. So this will be shared to you. You'll be getting the recording of this webinar in just a few days. So don't worry about, the sharing it with your colleagues or managers. So we'll start off by talking about a quick recap of what we know about traditional SIEM solutions and where they help and what kinds of use cases they can solve, and then look at where they come short and why we need to look at something that is relatively newer, which is UEBA or UEBA. Then I'll give you the 5 examples and talk about 5 anomalies that you need to track in your network and exactly why we need to watch out for those kinds of anomalies. Just touch upon a few use cases over there. And finally, over the course of the webinar, I'll also introduce you to ManageEngine's UEBA solution, so that you can see how we can do everything that we are discussing using a ManageEngine offering. Right, so that is what we've got planned for today. Before we get started, let me have a quick answer from you guys. How many of you are already using a UEBA solution? Can you quickly let me know on the chat? Just say a yes or no. How many of you are already using a UEBA solution? Let me see how many answers I can get. Use the chat option to let me know, just a yes or a no, depending on if you're using a UEBA already. I'm just going to wait for a few seconds to receive some answers, because this is a relatively less adopted technology. I'm not saying people don't use it. A lot of organizations use it, but it's still varying in terms of how many organizations are actually using it. So let me just wait for a few seconds. Use the live chat option to let me know a simple yes or no if you are using a UEBA solution. Awesome. So I see most of you have said no. A couple of you have said yes, which is good. Which means that most of you are probably exploring this technology, which is probably why you're here. So, okay, that was good to get an idea of, and this is quite similar to what I usually see at other events as well. It's a lot of people do use monitoring tools in their network, but not too many organizations are using full-fledged UEBA solutions. And I'm going to try to show you why you need UEBA, and hopefully you will start to see the benefits and merits of using a solution in your network. So let's get started. So this is a slide from Microsoft's Ignite conference, where they talk about how long it takes for a typical attack to take place in a network. they're focusing mostly on the Windows infrastructure, focusing on their Active Directory and domain controllers. And what you can see in this graph, he said, they say that an attacker who's trying to compromise your network may take any amount of time to do their research and preparation, which seems fairly straightforward. But now once they first compromise a host in your network, it takes them on average just 24 to 48 hours, 1 to 2 days, in order to compromise domain admins, right? So in 24 to 48 hours, which is 1 to 2 days, an attacker on average is able to move from compromising any normal host in your network to compromising domain admins, right? So they use various different techniques to move around your network and, you know, get these credentials. But this is an alarming thing, that it takes just under 2 days on average for an attacker to compromise domain admins. Now, what you see after that in the red is even more frightening, which is that it takes about 150 days for the organization on average to detect or discover that they have been breached. So essentially what happens is you get attacked, one of the hosts, maybe one of your end user workstations gets compromised, and within a couple of days, domain admins is compromised, and you realize that this has happened 150 days later, which is about 5 months later. Now, obviously, this is a huge problem, and this usually stems from a lack of effective monitoring in the network, right? Monitoring is obviously not a simple thing to do. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, just because I'm collecting logs, I can, you know, detect an attack immediately. What is lacking oftentimes is the analytics needed to crunch large volumes of log data, gain actionable insights so that you can immediately detect an attack within this time frame, right? Within this time frame, you detect the attack and not become one of the organizations where it has taken 5 months for them to discover they've been breached. So traditional SIEM solutions used rules to track various kinds of suspicious activities, right? So if you're using an auditing tool already, some of you said, in fact, I saw when we had asked how many of you are using a UEBA solution, some of you said that you're using a basic auditing tool, right? So so you probably have things like, you know, rules, alerting rules, report rules, and correlation rules in place, wherein you're able to track specific things that concern you, right? So that is good because it helps you track specific events of concern. So you may have, for example, a correlation rule enabled, which tracks events happening on your VPN and your database together, right? So that is good, and that helps you with addressing various use cases, but these have a lot of challenges, right? So for one, they have a limited scope in detecting what we call anomalies. So anomalies are basically something that is unusual, and rule-based alerts cannot detect anomalies beyond a point, right? Because rules are very specific in what they're tracking. So for every possible anomaly, you essentially need to have rules configured, and that can become laborious, and beyond a point, it does not make any practical sense. So what this means is that traditional rules, while they are good, it might result in some threats being missed, right? That is a problem, that it might result in some threats being missed, because you have a situation where you know that attacks are taking too long to be discovered, and maybe it is because that organizations are not able to track something unusual like an anomaly, and this is why they're missing a lot of these threats. So how do we tackle that? So that is where the concept of UEBA or UEBA comes into the picture. And UEBA stands for User and Entity Behavior Analytics. And it means that you are looking at these anomalies that rule-based detection mechanisms missed out on, right? So UEBA, for those of you who haven't heard of this yet, stands for User and Entity Behavior Analytics. and it uses machine learning techniques to augment your traditional rule-based SIM solutions. So what a UEBA does is it profiles the behaviors of users and systems in a network to form what we call a security baseline. So a security baseline is essentially what normally happens in your network on any given day. So this means that it's looking at who is doing what, when, and where in your network on any given day, and it knows what to expect from a user or a system, or system means entity basically, and it looks at what normally happens so that anytime there is a deviation from normal behavior, you will be able to detect that, right? So this is not a completely new technology. We've already seen these kind of machine learning based analytics being used in various by various industries already, right? Think about it. If you look at, for example, many of you have social media accounts like Facebook and Twitter. If you might have seen a situation where your account got disabled or locked out, or maybe it forced you to change your password because it detected unusual activities, right? Or maybe sometimes I have had this happen, and maybe some of you have as well. Maybe you're traveling on work or a vacation to another country, and because Facebook sees that you are logging in from a different place, it requests for an additional authentication, or some extra check before it lets you go through, because it detects that something unusual is happening. Why is this user, who normally maybe logs in from, say, California, why are they doing this from maybe Sweden or something like that? So this technology exists. We see it often with our ATM machines and credit cards, where if there is some very unusual activity, banks do try to notify you, or in extreme cases even block a specific account until further action is done, right? So your ATM pins or your internet banking pins may get disabled or require a re-authentication or a reset if anomalous activities are detected. So you can appreciate why this is important, right? So this kind of technology is important because it helps us, thwart a possible hack to one of our accounts. Now, the same concept is being extended to SIM solutions as well, right? So we are trying to spot unusual events that are happening in the network, and we are going to monitor what we call the risk score of each user and system or entity, right? So this is UEBA, and what it does is, like we looked at the cases of an ATM or social media accounts, we are essentially saying, let us watch what every single user and system is doing. We know what they normally do, so let us see if they deviate from their normal behavior. And if they do, we are going to increase the risk score of that user and entity, and we are going to prioritize our investigations to those users and entities that have a higher risk score, right? That is the idea in a nutshell. And these anomalies could be various different things, but these are the three main anomalies that we are concerned about. The first is the time of the event. The second is the volume of events. And the third is the pattern of events, right? So these are the different kinds of anomalies that we are concerned about. For example, when I say time, if we know that a user normally works from 9 to 5, and we know this because this user has been doing that for several months, one fine day, this user logs on to a system at midnight and copies a file, right? So that would be unusual based on the time, because this user does not work at midnight and normally works from 9 to 5. So why is this user doing something late at night? Now, of course, this does not mean that you need to jump the gun and say that this is a data breach, because maybe it could be legitimate, but this, as you can see, is an anomaly, and we need to be able to track such an event. So this is how does a UEBA know that these are anomalies? Is it looks at the data collected by your SIM solution. Your SIM solution is collecting large volumes of log data from different user systems, applications, network equipment, and so on. And because of that, UEBA has so much of data to learn from, right? That is the concept of machine learning. Machine learning is really about learning from large data sets so that you can then gain some knowledge from that data set and gain actionable intelligence, right? So you have so many logs. You have logs that have been collected, say, from Active Directory and trained on, as we call it, right? So this is something called the training period of a machine learning algorithm. So you've trained your algorithm for, say, several weeks from your Active Directory logs, and now your algorithm knows what time a user usually logs in and what do they normally do. So now it can detect these kinds of anomalies. So we looked at time, which is quite straightforward, that some user or system is doing something at an unusual hour. Then we have volume, which means that more or less events than expected are happening. So if we know, for example, we see maybe X logon failures on a specific server on any given day, and we then realize that suddenly the number of logon failures has become, say, 20x, then we know that something might be up, right? So it could be, again, it could be file activities, it could be other things as well. If you see a larger than expected volume of events at a given time, it could be at a normal time, it need not be at an unusual hour, but the volume by itself could be the telltale signs of a data breach. And finally, you have pattern of events, right? So pattern basically means anything unexpected in terms of the pattern. For example, a user who works on machines A, B, and C and has never accessed any other machine for several months, suddenly logs on remotely to a machine D, which may happen to be a sensitive machine, right? So that would be the pattern, because it's something unexpected. We don't expect this to happen, and we can track such events as well. So all of this is going to be done by a UEBA solution. We are going to look at anomalies, and we are going to see how these kinds of things can be tracked using a UEBA solution. So let's look at what kind of use cases do we really address. So we know traditional SIEM solutions are good for tracking individual events as well as patterns of events. So for example, if you have one single event that you know that you want an alert for example, something like a user being escalated to domain admins in Active Directory, right? Such an event is a concern, and you can set up an easy alert for that and be notified. Also, what you can do with traditional SIEM solutions is track patterns of events that happen across systems and applications, right? So what this means is, if you know that a specific kind of pattern, like a brute force or worm activity, or those kinds of things, or multiple attempts of SQL injection, those things that conform to a specific pattern, you're able to track with your traditional SIEM. Now, where UEBA comes into the picture is to track situations of insider threats, right? Because insider threats are very persistent. It's not something that might just happen immediately in 1 minute. You could have an attacker lurking for a long time, doing various different things, learning more about your network, navigating through, moving through your network, slowly gaining more privileges, accessing different things, changing different things. And in such cases, you may not be able to track it with simple rules, right? So you need to have a more robust anomaly-based detection and track over time what is going on in your network. So the same can be said about account compromises, because account compromises are complicated because the user may not be at fault and might not even know that their account has been compromised. So those kind of situations where someone's account is compromised and the malicious actor is trying to access sensitive resources, we see that for such use cases, UEBA is very powerful. And also for data exfiltration, if you have someone trying to steal data from your network, and again, is not doing it at an instant, but rather is doing this over time, you have to again have this sort of end-to-end tracking, where little events which may not, you know, set off your tripwires or your rules, but many of these anomalies, small anomalies happening over a period of time, might indicate a breach, and you need to be able to do that end-to-end tracking. So UEBA is very powerful for these areas. So let's look at 5 cases of events that we can track with a UEBA, and this will give you a good idea on how to get started. Right, so I'm going to cover 5 examples. These are going to be cases that you can watch out for in your network. These would be a good starting point in terms of what events you need to track for those of you especially who are new to UEBA and just getting started with this technology. So let's have a look at 5 events. The first type of events and anomalies that I want you to track are logon events. The reason is because most attacks inevitably have logon events in their kill chain, right? When an attack happens, someone must have logged on somewhere, right? Either they themselves carry out the attack or someone compromises their account, and then for which you have to have logon events, right? So normally speaking, when we track logon events using rules, there's only so much you can track. But what we can do with UEBA is we can build a baseline for logon events, know exactly who is logging on to which system and when, and we can track this for both successful and failed logons, right? And we can also keep an eye out for account lockouts. So what we can do as a result, so once we have formed this security baseline, we can then start looking out for suspicious things like an unusual remote logon. If we know that a user has never done a remote logon in their time in your organization, but suddenly remote logon to a host that they've never accessed before, we can now track this and identify this because we have that baseline for the user and we know what they do normally, right? So it could also be, for example, a large volume of failed logons or account lockouts. So many of the attacks that we see involve especially the kind of password attacks and credential dumping and other credential based attacks. All of these will trigger a lot of failed logons. And these failed logons might even be dispersed across systems and users. But when we see the larger volume of these kind of activities, we can quickly go and see who is the culprit for this. Is this something that is a genuine mistake? Or is it someone who is trying to carry out an attack? Right? So this is why it's very useful. And again, you can see, we said the 3 types of anomalies are the time. So we can see that if a logon is happening at an unusual hour, we can track that based on the volume. So if we see a large number of account lockouts or failed logons, we can track that. And also the pattern, right? So if someone is doing a first-time host access, that would be unusual and out of the blue, we can track that as well. So this is case 1. Case 2 is file activities, right? So your file activities are obviously an important thing that you want to monitor, because ultimately most of our monitoring is geared toward protecting important data. So we need to track accesses and modifications made to the files and folders in our network. And all of this data that we're collecting about the accesses and modifications of files and folders can be used to train our UEBA algorithm, so that we can then start tracking anomalous file accesses and modifications. So we want to focus on our sensitive files, of course. These could be system files, log files, and also confidential content files, right? So these are the main files that we are focused on. You could have sensitive data or confidential data in files. You can have system files in your which are of course critical and you don't want anyone to tamper with, and you might have other log files which again you don't want people to tamper with. So you can monitor these files and again build a baseline, know what is the typical file creations, deletions, reads or accesses and modifications or changes that normally happen. So this is again what we train our UEBA algorithms on, so that we know what normally happens, who is doing what, when and where, when it comes to your file activities. We know about the creations, deletions, modifications, reads, writes, etc., including the failed attempts. So we have a very good picture of what's going on. And subsequently, we can watch out for unusual things, such as a high volume of events occurring within a short period of time. So what if you have, for example, multiple failed access attempts to a sensitive file within a short period of time? So you may have a few failed access attempts every day, which might be normal, which could just be someone, you know, by mistake trying to access a file or entering a wrong credential, any of these things that might happen normally, which, you know, might not be a big concern. But if you see that a specific sensitive file is having multiple denied access attempts, then you may realize that is someone trying to, access it unauthorized, and you can track this again with a UEBA solution because you have the baseline of what normally happens. The next event is configuration changes, right? So changes in general are something that you want to monitor because any change, even a single change made to one of your critical configurations can jeopardize your entire security system, right? So what if someone goes and moves an end user to domain admins in Active Directory? Just a single event can bring down your entire infrastructure, because once someone has domain admin privilege, they can just go to a GPO, right click and delete, and that can cause some serious damage. So configuration changes is again something that you need to track, but obviously not all configuration changes are bad. You do have changes happening every day. People might change permissions, firewall or network configurations. People might change application whitelist. People might change Active Directory users. And when I say people, I mainly focus on your privileged users or your fellow administrators, right? Because these are the people who have the privilege to make some of these critical changes in your network. And yes, they do as part of their job, as part of a job, an administrator has to make some of these changes. So it's obviously not that everything is a cause for concern, but sometimes you may either have an administrator making a change by mistake, naively, or you might have an administrator who has had their account compromised, right? So that is a danger. And we've seen this. We saw this in the Microsoft example, that domain admin can get compromised in as less as 2 days after the first host is compromised. So in that, if that is the case and you have a privileged account compromised, they could make some changes to your configurations which might be malicious. Or the third case could be that you have a rogue insider who is trying to jeopardize your organization's security. And again, this would be an insider threat. So in all of the three cases, whether it's a naive administrator, whether it's a malicious insider, or whether it is an external actor who has compromised domain admin, in all of these cases, you might end up seeing unusual changes made to your critical network configurations, right? Things like what we see on the slide: permissions, file permissions, network policies, application whitelist, Active Directory changes to users, groups, computers, OUs, GPOs, and all of these things need to be tracked. So again, once you form the baseline of the changes that normally happen, you can then identify suspicious activities that your privileged users are doing. So for example, if a privileged user makes maybe 5 changes to your Active Directory users on average on any given day, but does 100 suddenly, right? That would be a big concern, because why are they doing this? Again, I'm not saying that it means it's a breach for sure, but you need to track this and investigate this immediately. So the fourth event is various system events that you may see, right? Because anytime you have a malware or any kind of malicious activity, that will inevitably trigger various system events, right? So if you have a ransomware, for example, launching on a machine, it's going to do a lot of things to your system. You might see a new process installed. You might see new kinds of services running on your machine. You might have an unexpected shutdown or a reboot. You might have registry level changes. Right? So a lot of different things happen when a malware is installed. I mean, the very fact that a new program is installed as well, right? So these kind of system events need to be tracked, and you need to monitor all of these things, and you need to again detect unusual system events. So here, especially when we talked about the pattern of, when we talked about the types of anomalies, we said it's the main things that we watch out for are time, volume, and pattern. For system events especially, the pattern becomes a big concern, because more than just the time or the volume, oftentimes it's not several system events. It could just be a single system event or a few system events that by themselves can be a cause for concern. And that is where you need to track anomalous patterns of events, right? So for example, if a new process that is installed on a server, you can track that, and you need to know that this has happened, because this normally might not happen on the server, right? So if I'm not saying the time and volume of system events don't matter, but the pattern matters so much more, especially when it is something that is happening for the first time, on a system. These kinds of things can really be a major cause for concern. So track these things, know what is going on in your systems, know these kind of activities. And I want to also emphasize on USB and registry activities in particular, because these, again, it need not be the volume, but it can just be something unusual that is happening, a USB being plugged in and something being copied, or registry level changes that are unusual. And finally, the fifth event that I want to touch upon is tracking your network traffic. So this means looking at your network perimeter logs from your firewalls, IDS, IPS, routers, and switches. And these events can tell you important things and help you detect an attack at an early stage. So you need to monitor the inbound and outbound traffic in your network. Basically, where is it coming from, the source of the traffic, and where is it going, or the destination of the traffic. And you need to track both allowed and denied connections, because your firewall might be blocking a specific IP address. And if you see that there is an unusual level of firewall denied connections, that could be the telltale signs of a breach, because that could mean that someone is trying to gain access to a resource in your network. So this is important to spot abnormal traffic. And again, this can be based on the volume of traffic that you're seeing. The volume of denied connections especially could be a cause for concern, because if you see repeated denied connections coming in from the same source, that means you might want to investigate that source and see what's going on. And you might also want to see the firewall traffic to specific destinations or servers in your network. So if you see again, high volume of traffic, more than expected to a specific server, you might want to see what's going on. It could also be the time again. It could be the time of the traffic. Maybe at a time when you don't expect a lot of traffic, you see a spike, and that could be a concern. And it could be a pattern as well. Right. So again, the fundamentals remain the same for any of these categories of events. We are concerned about the time, volume, and pattern of anomalies. And how we track that is we form a baseline for all of these different categories of events so that we can subsequently detect something anomalous going on in the network. So we have looked at a few examples. So how do we track this using a solution? So we have a solution from Manage Engine called Log360 UEBA, which is an add-on to our SIEM solution Log360. For those of you who don't know, Log360 is Manage Engine's SIEM solution, which is an integration of multiple tools, two of which are listed here on the screen. And these are the two main components of Log360, which is Event Log Analyzer, a general log management tool for monitoring your servers, applications, and network devices, and AD Audit Plus, which is a dedicated Active Directory, real-time Active Directory auditing tool. So both of these tools integrated together is Log360, and we have something called the UEBA add-on or the UEBA add-on, which works on the data collected by Log360, and we apply these machine learning algorithms to form a baseline of what is going on. We track those 5 events, categories of events, and more by applying these machine learning algorithms so that we can help you track anomalies in your network. So let me quickly show you how that would look like in our solution. So I'm jumping into Manage Engine's Log360 UEBA. I'm not going to give you a detailed demo, but I want to give you a quick overview of how this would look like. So what you see here is a distribution of risk scores for various users, right? We touched upon this concept of risk scores, which essentially helps you prioritize your security investigations. So even for those of you who have never seen a UEBA solution in action, you immediately know that you can see on the left pane these different users with risk scores assigned to them. And you can see that, okay, a lot of users have a risk score of 0, so you don't really, are not really concerned about them at this point. But you see that a few users have a high risk score. So you immediately know that you need to investigate these users. So how you can do that is you simply click on a specific user that you want to investigate. You immediately get an overview of what are the risks that this user might be, could be a concern for. So this user might have a compromised account, or it could be an insider threat, or there's a low chance of a data exfiltration as well. So now you can see the individual anomalies that cause this user's risk score to be increased to 55. And here you can see those individual anomalies. So you can see that is unusual registry access, unusual registry creations, unusual registry access failures, and so on, unusual registry deletions, unusual registry modifications. It goes on. You see then unusual software restrictions, unusual file modifications, unusual removable disk reads, some failure events as well for the removable disk. We see abnormal Windows logons, host shutdowns, service installation, software installation, and so on, right? So you see a lot of different things that are happening. You see some system file changes, multiple file modifications, and you can also see here the obtained was 306 events when the threshold or the average is 32 events. So because the UEBA solution has studied every single user and system in your network, it knows what they normally do, and it knows what they normally do across the different categories of anomalies that we saw. So it then starts flagging sharp deviations from expected behavior, and it raises the risk score of that user or system. So you get all of these different events, you get to see individual anomalies, and you can click on details and drill down to the actual events that are happening. So we said multiple file modifications. You can now see these individual file modifications. You can see important details like who, when, which, what, and you can continue your investigation of this incident, right? So this is all of this information is given to you at your fingertips, not only for your users, but also for your entities, right? So for your entities as well, like I said, sometimes the user might not know, but their system might be compromised. So you need to track the anomalies on a system as well. So here again, you see that most systems are okay. Most systems have a low risk score, but you have a few systems that have a high risk score. So it says here, Bob's personal machine has a high risk score. So you can click on this and investigate what's going on. You can see that over time, the risk score has changed. So on a given day, the risk score was 86. So you can click on view details and see what were the events that happened on that machine. And you can see what were the individual anomalies. So you can see these things like registry access. You can see exe files, DLL files disallowed to run. You can see various different things that have happened, rules modified. You can see file creations, file permission changes, file modifications on the host. You can, again, as always, go drill down to individual events and see how these individual events are happening, the who, when, which, what. And you can investigate, you can watch list this user if you want to prioritize your investigation, and you can identify and mitigate the breach at an early stage, right? So what UEBA is doing, to quickly summarize, is it is learning from your logs what to expect. This is the training period of the machine learning algorithm, where it learns from your logs exactly what is going on, and it forms what we call a security baseline. And once it forms the security baseline, it can then subsequently detect anomalies in your users and systems. So what you will get is a dynamic view of risk scores of every user and entity in your network. You can see that some users will have a high risk score, which allows you to prioritize your investigations. You can then click on a specific user, gain a quick overview on what is going on, what could be the possible threats. Drill down, you can see the individual anomalies that have been flagged by the solution and see why the risk score has been increased. And once you get the anomalies, you can drill down to the individual anomalies and see what is going on, what each of the events were, and you can quickly investigate and respond to the security incident, right? So this is a very powerful tool that you get at your fingertips. You additionally get anomaly reports, wherein you can track individual events and track what is going on. So you can see, for example, you can track anomalies of USB activities, registry activities, application whitelist, firewall changes, logons, and so on. And this is available for Windows, Unix devices, as well as your applications, as well as, very importantly, your firewall devices. Right? So we give out-of-the-box support for a wide range of firewall vendors. So you can add these devices and start generating and monitoring your network for anomalies. You get dashboards that tell you, what are the trends of anomalies. You get very neat visualizations of the various anomalies that are happening in your network. You can see trends. You can then get views for users where you get the risk scores, and you can get the same for your entities as well. And you can quickly click on specific users or entities, see what is going on, investigate and view the anomalies, and then drill down to individual anomalies and investigate what is going on in your network. Right? So this is a new way of monitoring your network. We are looking beyond just our traditional solutions. I get a question often saying, which is better, a traditional solution or the UEBA? And the answer is you need both, because your traditional solution works with your UEBA solution. For one, your traditional SIEM solution helps you address various security and compliance requirements. And your UEBA is a way by which you augment your traditional functionality by bringing in machine learning based analytics, right? That is why we call it an add-on to your SIEM solution. So you have Log 360 and you use your traditional rule-based alerting and reporting and correlations for your various security and compliance needs. And you then have the add-on of UEBA, which brings in machine learning based analytics to take your monitoring to the next level so that you can detect and mitigate attacks that you may have missed otherwise, right? So this brings me toward the end of this webinar. I'm quickly going to launch a poll so that we can understand how many of you are existing customers of Log 360, or if you're evaluating Log 360, and if you would like to get a product specialist such as myself to assist you with an evaluation of Log 360 and UEBA, right? This will, you can see a poll on your screen. This will help us understand how many of you are using Log 360 or evaluating Log 360, and how many of you would like us to reach out to you and give you a free web-based demo of the solution, right? So someone like myself can get in on a call. We can configure Log 360 UEBA in your environment, and we can help you set things up and help you evaluate the solution, right? So I'm just going to wait for a few more seconds for more people to answer the poll. Just let us know if you are evaluating Log 360. That includes UEBA as well. And if you would like us to give you a demo of the solution, right? So we can, a lot of the times the configuration is challenging if you have not worked with a solution before, but we can easily help you set it up. And we usually can finish that in just a day, right? So most of the time we see our clients seeing results from day one of deployment. So you can, we can set this up for you, apply a free license for 30 days so that you can then tinker around and see if the solution is working as desired, right? So thank you so much for answering. This helps us reach out to you effectively so that we know who wants a demo, and we reach out only to them. And finally, one more quick poll is, let me just launch that as well. This is on the session feedback. Just please take a few seconds of your time to let us know if you like this webinar. Again, this helps us know if what we're doing is resonating with our audience. This will then help you, this will then help us make sessions that are more engaging. And you can also drop an email to me if you wish, right? So you see my email on the screen. If you have specific questions or you have suggestions for future webinars, you can simply drop me an email so that we can try to incorporate those topics in future sessions as well. And finally, now you can ask your questions on the Q&A. So I'm going to be available for another 5 to 10 minutes to answer any questions. So let's see how many of you have questions. You can use the Q&A section that you see on your Zoom panel to send out any questions that you have, and we will try to answer them right away. Okay, so I have a couple of questions that have come in, so let me start answering them. The first question is from Mohammed Sohail. So thank you so much for your question. His question is, we are already using Event Log Analyzer. Can we implement UEBA? Absolutely. So if you're already using Event Log Analyzer, Log 360 UEBA is an add-on, and it will work on the log data that event log analyzer is already collecting. So these could be data from your Windows servers, your Unix machines, your SQL servers, your firewalls and routers, and all of the logs that have been collected from event log analyzer will now be we now will implement machine learning based analytics so that we can form a security baseline of expected behavior, and we will then flag anomalies and give you the risk scoring of all the users and systems. So yes, most definitely you can implement UEBA. It will not take too much time since you're already using event log analyzer, which means you're already collecting data from various sources. And now it's just a matter of applying this license of UEBA so that you can start immediately, using the machine learning based analytics. So in case you want any help or assistance with implementing this, you can drop me an email and we can get in touch with you at your convenience and help set this up for you. So the next question is from Sivanageshwara Rao. Thank you for your question. His question is this used only for monitoring logs? Well, yeah, I mean, our SIEM solution does collect other events as well, including data from, say, your security solutions like your endpoint protection, vulnerability scanners, and so on. And we also have other data sources like threat intelligence. But the UEBA that we apply is only for the log data, right? So our SIEM solution is an integrated platform which brings in various kinds of data. We're also looking at Active Directory risks. We're looking at threat intelligence feeds and so on. But the UEBA is working on events, which means it is working on the logs, right? So we use the logs and we're looking at if a specific log or an event is anomalous, and we flag that in our solution. So I hope that answers your question. In case that was not what you meant, do let me know and we can take this forward. Other than that, like I said, you can see my email ID on the screen. If you have any environment specific questions or you need any assistance with deploying our solution, you can drop me an email and we can take this conversation forward and help you set up and leverage our solutions better. So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. Also, thank you for those who asked questions. We really appreciate you taking time off and joining us for these sessions. Now, make sure that you try out our solutions because we have free trials for all of our solutions. And if you need any help setting it up, just drop an email and we can take this forward. So thank you so much for joining us today, and bye for now.